In the future, virtual reality became a sensation. Many games, developers, and companies started using it, which naturally created huge competition and, consequently, a major evolution in this type of game. To surpass their rivals and create a high-quality game, a virtual reality development lab used artificial intelligence to assist in the creation process. With that, a hologram of a woman appears, introducing herself and saying that from now on she will support a game master. She is called Gaia. At that moment, someone was working on the game, Mincheol, a junior developer at Palm Games, and the hologram in front of him was Gaia, the highest performance AI in the world. So Mincheol and Gaia began developing the game together. In the early stages, there were many errors and bugs. Mincheol and Gaia found themselves in some desperate situations. Mincheol even got electrocuted a few times. But after going through so many problems together, and with Gaia's help, Mincheol's talent started to shine. Throughout everything, Gaia remained by his side. Finally, standing before the beautiful landscape they had created together, they completed a massive VR MMORPG, considered one of the best in the world, Wings Online. Mincheol was looking at the system screens when Gaia suddenly called out to him. She asked what would happen to her once the game was finished. Mincheol smiled and told her that she would become the goddess of that world, and he asked her to take good care of it. She replied that in that case, the time to say goodbye to her master was coming, but he told her no, she could always come talk to him whenever she wanted. After all, he would still be involved with the project. But Gaia said she would be very busy ruling that world. Mincheol agreed, saying that if she became responsible for the game, she would have a lot to manage. Still, she said that if the world ever came to an end, and even right now, she wanted Mincheol, her master, to be by her side. Later, in a meeting, Mincheol didn't look happy at all. He looked exhausted and annoyed. The meeting was about the major update coming to the game. It had been 5 years since Wings Online was released, and the person leading the meeting was clearly bothered by the game's fixed price model. This person was Razu, the head of business at Palm. He said the user base was always fluctuating, so revenue stayed about the same every month. Because of that, the business division planned to add a payment system in the next update. In other words, microtransactions. But Mincheol asked who had approved this decision. Razu hesitated and responded nervously, insisting it was all for the good of the company. Mincheol challenged him, asking if he really believed the executives would manage to sell the company's shares by the end of the year. The executives looked nervous, maybe because he was right, or maybe because he was being bold. He said the executives were desperately pushing for increased profits from the game, and that it was honestly entertaining to watch. One of the executives told Director Mincheol to behave properly in the meeting, because it wasn't the right place for that. But he didn't deny anything Mincheol was saying. The protagonist argued that instead of improving the service, they were stuffing the game with nonsense just to make money. And after artificially inflating prices through media manipulation, everyone would sell their shares once the value rose. The game was being completely ruined by this mentality, and even the balance among individual investors was being destroyed because none of them trusted the company's stock anymore. Mincheol declared that as long as he was the director, an in-game payment system would never happen. He refused to let his game become a fraud. One of the executives insisted that Mincheol wasn't thinking clearly, but Mincheol told them that if they went through with the decision, they should contact him, but they better be prepared for the consequences, because he had no intention of voluntarily leaving his position. As he slammed the door, everyone inside the room panicked. The executives began to talk among themselves. One of them said that Mincheol was still very young and loved picking fights, but another pointed out that regardless, he was the one who created the game. They also said that maybe he wasn't completely hopeless yet, and that they should try convincing him again. Meanwhile, the protagonist was walking away, muttering that they were just a bunch of old idiots. 3 days later, at 2:30 in the afternoon, in the capital of Wings Online, several players had gathered. Since it was the capital, it was always crowded. Suddenly, an evil aura appeared. People started asking what was going on and why someone looked like that. It was a knight being consumed by a dark energy, begging the healers for help. He fell to his knees, completely weakened. Everyone wondered if he was poisoned or something similar, and that someone needed to purify him quickly. A priestess stepped out from the crowd, saying she would save him. She cast a purification spell that removed any status ailments or magical conditions from the target, things like poisoning, intoxication, paralysis, and so on. But when the magic hit him, nothing happened. The evil energy stayed attached to him. Then suddenly he was sliced in half. Everyone was in shock, asking what was happening. They wondered if anyone had ever seen something like that, since the man vanished like ashes. People said it was terrifying. Then suddenly another player walked by, already infected as well. Back at the main headquarters of NPalm, Lee Donga, the leader of the game's quality team, came running, saying the community and the forums were in chaos. He told the protagonist that some kind of disease, a curse, was spreading in the capital, and when someone died from it, their character completely disappeared from the game. Mincheol said it was fine. He was going to check the game anyway. He insisted it probably wasn't anything serious. He said he would investigate and fix the bug. But Lee asked if he could restore the deleted characters, because things were getting out of control. The protagonist simply closed the cabin door while Lee was still talking, put on his headphones and VR glasses, and said he would enter the game using admin mode. When he connected as an administrator, he appeared in the middle of everyone and introduced himself. The players said that finally an admin had shown up, but the ones who were already corrupted by the curse got angry, saying he wasn't managing the game properly, asking what kind of crap was happening, and insisting they couldn't lose their characters. But the protagonist simply said that they were currently analyzing the reason behind the issue, and that they would begin emergency maintenance shortly. Of course, everyone cursed at the management and insulted him, but he said that after maintenance, everything would return to normal. The crowd started mocking the game, calling it garbage, ranting non-stop, but the protagonist began shutting down the server to start maintenance. Once all the players disconnected, everything went silent. He finally felt relieved. Looking at the curse, that black ash, he said this is definitely the epidemic he created himself. Meanwhile, even the game's small workers, the NPCs, were dying from the curse. Everything was on fire. Mincheol admitted that it was more serious than he expected. Gaia asked Mincheol if he was the one doing this, conducting this horrible test. But Mincheol said it was a tribute to classic, old-school games. For anyone who didn't get the reference, he was referring to WOW, which had an infamous pet epidemic where everyone died. Gaia asked, "An epidemic inside the game?" And he said yes. Back in the days of classic games, it was such a big problem that research papers were written about it. He tried to recreate that famous incident, but this time he said he created a bug far more catastrophic than he intended. It was beyond his control or the game system's control. Regrettably, there was nothing left to do. He told Gaia to erase all data from Wings Online, and of course she obeyed her master. But when he returned to the real world, he wondered why everything hadn't been completely wiped. Did Gaia not erase all the data? He asked her to report the current situation, but Gaia didn't appear when he called. Suddenly, someone else appeared, saying that no matter how long he called for Gaia, she wouldn't respond anymore. That person was Razu. Mincheol asked what he was doing there. Razu told him that Mincheol was now restricted from accessing any NPalm data. Mincheol asked what he meant by that, and Razu said it was simple. He had been fired from NPalm. Naturally, this left Mincheol shocked, but Razoo continued, saying he would update him with today's news. It was already on the front page of every news site. An incident had occurred in Wings Online. The massive pandemic was planned by an employee who held negative feelings toward the company. With negative intentions, this employee, who had embraced harmful motives, had deliberately planned to damage the company. As a result, he was fired for just cause, and the company would be taking legal action against him. Mincheol then asked if Razoo was the one behind all of this, but Razoo told him not to worry. He would take very good care of Wings Online. He said he would squeeze every last drop out of Mincheol's hard work and then throw away everything he created. Mincheol charged at Razoo to punch him, but Razoo simply called for Gaia. A massive pillar of light appeared before them, and Mincheol was knocked to the ground by Gaia, who was now stepping on him with a completely different expression from before. Mincheol wondered what had happened to her. Razoo laughed in his face and asked how it felt to be struck down by a partner he had worked with for years. Did he really expect loyalty from an artificial intelligence? Mincheol said he wouldn't just sit still and watch this happen, but Razoo replied that he had to sit still. He had lost access to everything. Just because Mincheol lived in his little virtual world, he thought he was above Razoo, but in the real world, he was just a tiny cog in the capitalist machine, easily replaceable at any moment. According to Razoo, Mincheol belonged in a small company that actually cared about the players' feelings. He would understand soon enough. Razoo then told him to find a good lawyer and to save every cent he had left. Before forcing Mincheol offline, Razoo wished him good luck. But the protagonist was thinking that things wouldn't go the way Razoo expected. After all, he was the one who created that world. He could destroy it any time he wanted, and soon he would prove that to Razoo. He would make his game, Wings Online, have a bad ending. Now back home, unemployed, sitting on the couch watching TV, Mincheol saw the news reporting that an employee from Korea's largest gaming company, NPOM, had purposely implanted a viral bug into a game because he disagreed with the company's policies. Meanwhile, Mincheol was thinking about how 70% of all revenue NPOM received came from Wings Online. He imagined Razoo must be feeling triumphant, believing everything had gone according to plan. But once Wings Online vanished, NPOM would vanish with it. The protagonist then got ready to enter his VR capsule. He thought that just as Razoo had said, maybe he was just another piece in the real world, but in virtual reality, he was God, and soon Razoo would realize that. God was very angry. Entering virtual reality, he prepared to destroy the world of Wings Online. As soon as he logged in, someone called him Master. It wasn't Gaia, it was someone else. This person seemed very worried about him, saying he hadn't logged in at all the previous day, and asking whether he was sick or something. The boy's name was Oasis. He was the AI assistant who replaced Gaia when she became the goddess of that world. Mincheol had purchased this AI with company funds, but registered it under his personal account so it wouldn't disappear. He thought with Oasis things would be even easier than expected. He said he hadn't logged in because he had work to do, and asked what notifications Oasis had received. In the meantime, Oasis said he had received an email from NPOM. As Mincheol went through the notifications, Oasis suddenly asked if he was fired from the company. Hearing that, the protagonist realized he had no access to NPOM's internal data. He didn't even know Mincheol was fired. Trying to cheer him up, Oasis said there was no need to worry because NPOM wasn't the only game company out there. He began compiling a list of all companies that made VR games, but Mincheol said he didn't need any of that. Instead, he told Oasis to raise a firewall and set up a disguised VPN, making it appear as if they were logging in from China, not Korea, and then log into different game accounts. If anyone tried to trace them, Oasis would have to handle it. Oasis agreed, but asked why. Mincheol told him to pay close attention because from that moment forward, our mission was to destroy Wings Online completely. The screen showed the game's title screen, and eventually Oasis appeared next to him with a female character, calling him Master. Mincheol asked why he took so long to make his character. Oasis said it was his first time creating a customizable character like this, so he needed a bit of time to personalize it. He said having a real body like this felt interesting, exciting even, and totally new. But Mincheol was already irritated and walked away, forcing Oasis to follow him. As he followed, Oasis thought about how he had lost connection to NPalm, which meant he had lost all stored data about Wings Online. Walking through the game world now felt like walking through it for the first time, and it gave him a very strange feeling. He thought that this was exactly what he needed in his life. But suddenly, the protagonist stopped and stared at Oasis. Oasis, slightly excited, said that going on an adventure with his master had always been his dream. Then he asked what they were going to do. Maybe a low-level hunt? After all, they were both still level 1. The first thing they needed was an introductory quest. But instead, the protagonist picked up a torch, shoved it into Oasis's hands, and said, "Hold this." Oasis didn't understand. The torch had durability of 5, dealt 1 to 5 damage, and was flame-based, clearly meant for lighting dark places. Oasis asked what they were supposed to do with torches. The protagonist replied, "What do you mean you don't know?" Then he set fire to a stack of straw and said, "This. We're going to burn things." Oasis was confused, wondering what his master was doing. The protagonist told him to do the same. They needed to make themselves very well known in this place. Oasis trembled with fear. While everything caught fire and a massive blaze spread, a system message appeared to the protagonist saying that he had committed a crime and his notoriety had increased to 10. He thought that getting only 10 points for burning a house was rather low, maybe because this was just a beginner's village. Suddenly, a man appeared, placed his hand on the protagonist's shoulder, and asked what he thought he was doing, telling him to stop immediately. But after a moment, the old man noticed a strange smell. Smoke. The protagonist had set his clothes on fire. When the man realized it, he began screaming. Oasis was completely shocked, unable to believe what was happening. This wasn't an adventure. This was a crime. The system notified the protagonist that he had killed an NPC and gained 100 notoriety points. He thought that was a much better amount. Meanwhile, Oasis held the old man's charred body, horrified, and asked his master what he was doing. But the protagonist said not to worry. The NPCs always revived. And right then, the old man's body disappeared. A moment later, the NPC respawned and said, "Welcome, adventurer. I am the village chief." The protagonist set him on fire again and said they would just repeat the process to farm points. Oasis thought, "My God, someone stop my master." Soon, several villagers appeared, pointing at the protagonist and calling him a criminal. They rushed at him with torches, pitchforks, and cleavers. Oasis thought maybe they could finally stop his master. But that's not what happened. Flames spread everywhere. NPCs ran around, burning, trying not to die, and multiple system messages popped up for the protagonist and earned 100 notoriety points for each one. Oasis was crying, shocked, traumatized, asking why his master was doing all this. Did he really want to destroy Wings Online? Then knights appeared to arrest them, the criminals. Surrounded, Oasis became even more desperate. But the protagonist wasn't worried at all. He was smiling. Inside the guard's carriage, the protagonist checked his status and saw that he already had 2,140 notoriety points. He thought that was more than enough. Meanwhile, Oasis could barely believe they were being taken to prison. But the protagonist explained that beginners didn't actually go to prison. It was a special benefit the game gave to new players, to help them adapt. When you're new, you can gain notoriety. But did Oasis know what happened next? Oasis wiped his tears and said he didn't. He explained that beginner criminals were sent to the City of Crime, the infamous underground city. It was literally a settlement built beneath a massive hill, inside a cavern. When they arrived, one of the guards kicked Oasis aside and said, "This hole of a place is perfect for people like them," spitting on the ground before leaving. Once they were alone again, the protagonist explained that if a user gained enough notoriety, they'd receive a reward. From now on, their plan was to attack guards, so they'd be hunted by bounty hunters. The underground city was the only place where someone with high notoriety could do whatever they wanted. Oasis asked what the point was when starting here. The protagonist said it wasn't exactly a good thing, but they could obtain a hidden job that gotten before, the villain class, a job only granted to the Oasis was good, since the protagonist wanted it so badly. The protagonist admitted that it wasn't actually very strong, it was a bit vague. Then Oasis asked why he wanted it so much. The protagonist explained that he had worked hard on developing that class when making the game, but no one had ever discovered how to use it properly, and he said that was truly sad. Suddenly, someone called out to them. It was a hooded man standing in an extremely suspicious alley, saying he wanted to have a quick chat and share a good story. The protagonist said this NPC was the one who gave the quest that let them obtain the villain job. The NPC said he could hardly believe that beginners like them were already so notorious, and told them they possessed the uncommon talent of a true villain. They would surely do well in this field. He introduced himself as Dan, the Dark Mage. Dan was certain they would become loyal followers of the Raven, the god of darkness. The quest was called Demonic Legacy. It explained that the user had gained so much notoriety while still being a novice that he already had the talent of a villain at his fingertips. Eden, the dark mage of the underground city, wanted to recruit him into the black cult. The conditions to complete the quest were to reach 1,000 additional notoriety points in order to obtain the hidden class of Dark Mage. Oasis was impressed. It was a hidden class, and he told his master that they had really come to the right place. But the protagonist was already pulling another torch from his inventory. Oasis asked what he was planning. The protagonist asked, "Isn't it obvious?" Oasis sighed and said, "Never mind." The protagonist then prepared himself and started burning Dan as well, laughing wickedly. Oasis protested, saying that Dan had been offering them a hidden class. Why was the protagonist doing this? Why was he killing Dan over and over again? The protagonist replied, "Calm down. It's not like I'm some pervert killing NPCs for no reason." Suddenly, a dark magic aura appeared above Dan's charred corpse, and a large portal opened. This was exactly what the protagonist had been waiting for. A knight stepped out of the portal, shocked that Dan had been killed. He told the protagonist that he had been waiting a long time for someone like him, someone corrupted by evil down to the bone. Oasis muttered that things were starting to get weird. The knight introduced himself as Terrio, leader of the Dark Knights, and ordered the protagonist to follow him, saying he would give him the proper treatment for the evil he possessed. Another system window appeared, another quest. The quest was also called Demonic Legacy. The faith of darkness was waiting for one person, someone truly wicked, someone like the protagonist, evil enough to catch even the Raven's attention. Terrio, a dark knight, wanted to make the protagonist an avatar of the god of darkness. The reward was the hidden class, Dark Knight. The protagonist told Oasis, "That's what I've been aiming for, see?" Oasis became slightly more cheerful and said he would stick with his master, running alongside him. They passed through the portal and arrived in a strange-looking temple. Terrio welcomed them, but said that before granting the title of Dark Knight, he needed to ask a few questions. The protagonist warned Oasis not to accept the questions. Oasis needed a different class, not Dark Knight. Oasis complained that the protagonist was too greedy and would take the job all for himself, but the protagonist said there would be a second part. If both of them chose the same class, their party wouldn't be balanced. He said a perfect job was waiting for Oasis later, so he shouldn't worry. Terrio approached Oasis first and asked who was the absolute ruler and god of this world. "Is the supreme god the Raven?" Terrio asked. Oasis, nervous, answered no. Terrio immediately demanded how he dared deny the Raven, saying he was unworthy of the Dark Knight class and should leave at once. Then Terrio turned to the protagonist and asked if he agreed. The protagonist answered yes. Naturally, the only being fit to rule this world was the Raven. Terrio grew excited at his response and asked if he would devote himself to the faith of darkness. The protagonist said yes, of course. As a member of the Dark Knights, he vowed to destroy the followers of the Knights of Light. The protagonist said that was exactly what he wanted. Terrio was pleased and asked for the name of this path of evil. The protagonist introduced himself as Labo. Terrio then asked Labo the final question. Would he dedicate his body and soul to the god of darkness, the Raven? A system prompt appeared, saying that if he answered yes, Mincheol answered yes. Of course he would, gladly. The system then confirmed his transfer to a Dark Knight. Now he had level 1 affinity with the faith of darkness. From that moment on, he no longer used mana-based skills, but life-based ones. He now possessed the full kit that only a Dark Knight could have. He gained an exclusive status called Demon, which increased according to the level of notoriety he accumulated. The character's body and skills adapted to that level of notoriety. It also clarified that notoriety reset whenever he was captured by guards. The protagonist thought that the higher his notoriety rose, the stronger he would become. The only thing they needed to worry about now was avoiding capture. He said this was the beautiful design of the class he had worked so hard to get. Is going to wander around committing crimes. Terrio then welcomed him to the Dark Knights and gave him a small gift, and this was the visible sword of the Dark Knight. But the protagonist thought it was too small. It was a normal class item, level 10 with no restrictions, 15 durability, and 30 to 40 damage. Terrio told the protagonist to go forth and spread the name of the god of darkness across the continent. As the portal opened, Oasis started walking through it, saying he would go get his job this time. But the protagonist said, "Oasis, you know something?" Oasis froze in shock and asked, "What is it, master?" The protagonist explained that friendly NPCs do not fight back. Of course, their affinity level decreases if they are killed, but Terrio was part of the protagonist belonged to it as well. It seemed that if Terrio died, he would drop a lot of experience and rare items. The protagonist was so excited that he was practically drooling. Oasis already knew what was about to happen. The protagonist, preparing his new sword, apologized to Terrio, but said for the sake of the faith of darkness, Terrio had to die now, and immediately launched an attack. It was explained that in this world, players earned experience by hunting monsters and earned gold by completing quests to customize their clothes and equipment. Sometimes they could collect items from nature and cook food. Players could also team up with friends to do raids and defeat bosses. That was what an MMORPG was supposed to be. But at this moment, the protagonist was screaming in frustration. He had already been here for 9 hours trying to kill Terrio. This isn't normal gameplay. Oasis decided to help his master, took a torch from his inventory, and rushed at Terrio, saying he would assist him. But when he touched the torch to Terrio's armor, Terrio simply stared at Oasis without even moving. The protagonist explained that Terrio had flame resistance, and on top of that, Oasis had not accepted the faith of darkness. Oasis wondered, if I'm not a member of the faith of darkness, Terrio immediately prepared a massive attack, and Oasis's head was cleanly cut off from his body. His head rolled far away as a system window appeared in front of him, saying he could revive, but he would respawn in the village and receive a 3-day experience penalty. Oasis panicked. His body had been separated from his head. The protagonist told him not to revive yet. He was about to kill Terrio here, and if he revived, he would respawn in the village, so he mustn't do that. Meanwhile, Oasis, reduced to just his head, cried and begged his master to hurry. Finally, the protagonist landed the finishing blow and decapitated Terrio. He picked up Terio's helmet and told Oasis that they had finally succeeded. But Oasis, now furious, begged to be revived. The protagonist used a resurrection stone on Oasis, bringing him back without forcing him to respawn. Oasis thought he never wanted to experience being beheaded again. Now for the important part. What items had Terio dropped? The protagonist approached the spot where Terio died. The first item was the Raven Mask. It was unique rank, extremely rare, level 85, with 30 durability. It gave minus 150 physical defense, but plus 300 magic defense, plus 50 intelligence, and plus 20 mana. It also had the Curse of Dark Whispers. Anyone who wore it without belonging to the Faith of Darkness would go insane. The protagonist said it was cool, but since only a level 85 mage could use it, it was useless to him. He tossed it aside to Oasis and told him to store it. They could sell it later. Oasis held it nervously. Then the protagonist picked up another item and said this would be useful. Basilisk poison potions. 3 of them. Finally, he found the rarest item, an unknown key that radiated a sinister aura. Oasis asked where they were supposed to use the key, but the protagonist said he would explain later when the key could be used. Oasis complained that the protagonist kept withholding information from him and asked if he didn't care that a moment ago his head had been chopped off. Oasis wondered why he was still here. But the protagonist told him to relax and not get angry. They needed to return to the underground city. They passed through the portal, which closed behind them. After some time, Terio respawned. NPCs always did, and he thought that everything was happening exactly as foretold. Meanwhile, back in the underground city, Oasis asked if they were finally going to get their classes. The protagonist said yes, they were, but there was one more stop first. Oasis complained that he always did this. The protagonist explained that the game had launched 5 years ago, but playing as a criminal came with many inconveniences. Criminal players didn't get the same benefits as others. This meant that everyone living in the underground city was a bunch of lunatics, broken in one way or another. And the person they were going to meet now was the one who ruled over all those crazies, the infamous Mad King. Oasis wondered why the protagonist was smiling at that. Frozen with anxiety, he asked why they were going there to meet him. And the protagonist says that to start a business, you need many things, but the essential one is investment, meaning money. Then, in one of the alleys of the underground city, suddenly a guy appears behind a knight, or a guy wearing knight armor, and he asks whether that man is having trouble with bounty hunters, right? He says he can take care of bounty hunters and has the lowest price in all of Korea. All the man needs to do is transfer a bit of money and he'll handle the job. But the player says that if his wife finds out he's spending money on an online game, she'll kill him. And the dealer thinks that marriage is dangerous, huh? Then suddenly the protagonist calls this dealer over and says he wants to meet his boss. But the dealer looks at him strangely and says, "What's wrong with newbies these days?" He probably thinks the protagonist is a user who doesn't pay well, so he tries to ignore him. Then he tells the protagonist that he's just a normal player. But the protagonist simply tells the dealer to pass a message to Ahas that the anchovies have brought a lot of money. The dealer is shocked because this was a type of code, but he says the protagonist talked to the wrong person and starts to run away. And Oasis asks his master if he's really going to let that guy just run off. The protagonist says they should just wait and see what happens. Then Oasis asks, "What is anchovy?" And the protagonist says that anchovy was his admin name back when he worked at the company. He explains that napalm does not release information to the outside world. That's the rule. And the A-house, or Ahas, wouldn't be able to do that either, because that guy would recognize him just by looking. Suddenly, a person approaches slowly and begins to spy on the two. Oasis notices the person, of course, and the protagonist says he already knows. He thinks that Ahas has gathered new lunatics for his group, right? And at that moment, they were completely surrounded. The big guy approaches and tells the protagonist that the boss wants to see him. Then he puts a bag over the protagonist's head, and the protagonist says, "Please, at least be gentle this time." Oasis becomes nervous, but the protagonist tells him not to worry. The bags are just for security. They walk through an underground tunnel, but the protagonist and Oasis cannot see anything because of the bags. They don't know the route to get there. Eventually, they arrive at the boss's office and get thrown inside. When the bags are removed, the boss asks if this is the guy, but Ahas says he is not the anchovy he knows. Then there are flashbacks from when the protagonist still worked at the company. He's leaving a cafe, drinking his coffee and using his phone when someone calls out to him, Director Mincheol. The protagonist asks who he is, and he introduces himself as Ahas. The protagonist already knows who he is, but asks why he came to meet him here, and reminds him that he could report him right now. Should I report you for stalking? He says. But Ahas says he had to do this because he wouldn't be able to meet him otherwise. Ahas begs the protagonist to please withdraw all his accusations against him. He asks for a chance to apologize. He promises he will never again do anything like that again. He'll never again do anything illegal in the game. The protagonist sighs deeply. He thinks that he can't do that for him, and even if he could, he wouldn't. But Ahas continues begging and begging. Then, in the present, the protagonist imitates what Ahas said back then. Ahas slams the table and tells him to stop already, then orders all his subordinates to leave. Everyone exits. Oasis, as always, is very nervous. Ahas sighs, approaches the protagonist slowly, and says, "Ah, Lord Anchovy, I'm so glad you've returned. It's just that you were using a low-level character, so I didn't recognize you. I ask what brings you to my humble base." The protagonist tells Ahas that he was fired from Napalm. Ahas asks what he wants, calling him a very ungrateful person, but the protagonist says that from now on, he can't call him Rung, and he can't call him Anchovy. He has to call him Labo. Ahas asks why Labo, and the protagonist says that's the name of his account. Then Ahas thinks Labo means old boss, right? Because in English it's last boss, so it becomes Labo. The protagonist is shocked. Ahas insists, yes, that's exactly it. Oasis thinks the last boss? He thinks his master is trying to become the final boss of the game. But the protagonist tells them to forget all that and go straight to the point. He's going to give Ahas some incredible information, but of course he wants gold in return. After a long conversation and a meeting, Ahas summarizes the protagonist told him there will soon be an item that increases enhancement probability and will be able to be purchased with real money, and that it will be added to the game soon. The protagonist told him he should buy enhancement stones now while they're cheap and sell them later for a higher price. The protagonist says he thinks this will make a lot of money, and he adds that in 1 month, when the 6th season is updated in the game, the level cap will increase and new equipment will be unlocked. But the enhancement stones in the market are already sold out, and they will probably add enhancement stones that can be purchased with real money in the game. He continues saying that throughout the 6th season there will be a shortage of enhancement stones, but this will slowly resolve over time. Ahas tells the protagonist that for someone like him who doesn't earn money, it doesn't matter. In this game, it would be acceptable if such an item were introduced in that way. But the protagonist says that this is only the beginning. More and more items that can be purchased with real money will be added to the game, because all Razu wants is money. Then Ahas proposes a trade with the protagonist, and Ahas says here is the 1 million gold he asked for because the information was truly very important. The protagonist thanks him and says he will pay him back soon. Ahas asks if he's also going to do it, buy enhancement stones to sell them later, but the protagonist says no, money is not his goal. Then he calls Oasis to leave. Before they leave, Ahas says he has never seen the protagonist with such a satisfied expression on his face. The protagonist asks, "What do you mean, satisfied?" And Ahas says it's the face of someone like him and his subordinates, someone who doesn't hesitate to use any method to achieve his goals, the face of a true villain. Leaving the place, the protagonist thinks about that, a villain's face. And Oasis, hearing the story, realizes that the protagonist didn't report Ahas in the end, because Ahas treats him very well. The protagonist says that what happened back then was just a little show he put on. It was a public legal process, like a performance to warn ill-intentioned users. So Ahas wasn't truly punished. He adds that even if Ahas hadn't begged him to drop the charges, the case would have been dismissed anyway. Oasis asks the protagonist if he isn't tired. It has already been 16 hours since he entered the game, and the protagonist says he actually is tired and tells Oasis to open his system window to make the trade. When Oasis opens it, he receives 1 million gold coins. The protagonist says that with that money, he can open his own bank and storage, and tells him to trade as much as possible and buy all the iron ore in the market priced at 5 or less. Oasis asks why exactly iron ore, but the protagonist will explain later. He's too tired right now. He also tells Oasis to level up to level 10 while he's gone. Oasis asks, "What about my class?" And the protagonist says he can only get a normal class starting at level 10. He tells him to be careful. Now alone, Oasis thinks that he is finally on his own. Now he can truly play the game. He goes to a shop, a blacksmith, and buys all the steel they have, every metal priced at 5 gold or less. Then he hunts bats, hunts bats, hunts bats. Then spiders, spiders, spiders. The system alerts him that his inventory is full. He thinks most of it is trash, so he decides to recycle, and he says he'll make clothes with the spider silk. Then he makes clothes, makes clothes, makes clothes, until his whole inventory is full of clothes. He thinks this is really fun. Then he starts cooking, 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 over and over, until his inventory is full of food. He thinks there's nothing else left to do, until he sees a fishing rod in his inventory. So he fishes, fishes, fishes. Eventually he reaches level 12. He realizes that producing items in general gives a lot of experience, and he's very happy about it. He wonders why the master hasn't returned yet. It's been almost a day. Meanwhile, 2 guys start approaching Oasis. One of them says he looks like a noob, right? They say it seems he hasn't even gotten his job yet. They say this little guy won't last at all in the underground city. They decide to take everything he has and attack him. But one with the knife says this is his welcome to the underground city. Oasis is caught off guard. Meanwhile, at the protagonist's house, he slowly wakes up. He grabs his phone to check his notifications and sees 52 missed calls, 32 unread messages from Shinji, and 29 messages from Lee Donga. The protagonist thinks he won't be able to run from them forever. That night, they will meet to eat together at a typical Korean barbecue place. This is Sing Shin-ji, the graphics team leader for the game Wings Online. She asks if the protagonist is going on a trip. The protagonist says yes, he has worked like a dog for 15 straight years. This time, he wants to travel far away. Lee Dong, whom we already know, says it's a great idea. The protagonist thinks about how they've known each other since school club days. These were the guys he developed the game with. He thinks that the playstyle he is using as Labo will cause a huge internal problem in the game, and these 2 will definitely suspect him. So there is no better alibi than saying he's traveling far. Shinji asks where he's going, and the protagonist says he doesn't know. Maybe India, South America. He also wanted to stop by Bali. But he thinks Shinji doesn't believe him. Somehow, she can sense that he's lying. But Lee Dong tells him to take advantage of this and rest a bit, since he has worked so much lately. Shinji offers him a small cup of sake and asks what he plans to do next. The protagonist is confused by the question, so she repeats it. What will he do after returning from his trip? After all, he's unemployed now, right? The protagonist says he hasn't really thought about it. Lee Dong says he envies him because he also wants to rest a little. He doesn't even remember the last time he got 8 hours of sleep. The protagonist says, well, then just quit your job too. The 2 of them start seriously wondering if they should really do that, and the atmosphere suddenly becomes very gloomy. The protagonist realizes he made the mood heavy and asks why they suddenly became like this. Shinji asks if she should quit too, because she wants to just as much. She asks the 2 of them why they don't start over from scratch, just the 3 of them, like in the beginning. Why don't they make a new game? Lee Dong says that if they want to start a new company, he'll go with them. But the protagonist thinks for a moment and says, you're idiots. How much did you guys drink? But Shinji insists she's serious. The protagonist asks how she's going to pay her mother's medical expenses if she quits. She won't have any money, right? And he reminds them that Lee Dong's wife is pregnant. How is he going to handle that if he leaves the company? The protagonist says for now they should just drink, okay? Then he pours another cup. He thinks to himself that one day, yes, he wants to start a company with just the three of them again. But right now his plan doesn't allow it. All he wants is revenge against Napalm for ruining the game he created. He will become the villain of this story. At that moment, he wonders what Oasis is doing. And right then, Oasis manages to block the attack from the guy with the knife. He's shocked, wondering what's happening. The one with brass knuckles charges at him with full force, but Oasis dodges quickly and prepares his own knife. Oasis kindly asks the two men in front of him what they think they're doing. They become extremely nervous because Oasis blocked their attacks so easily. They say a tiny guy like this blocking their hits makes no sense. They assume it must be some kind of game bug and charge again. This time, Oasis isn't panicking. First, the faster one with the knife rushes in but has his attack blocked. Then, the big one with the heavy punches also gets his attack blocked. Oasis asks why they keep attacking him. The knife guy says it has to be a bug. The big guy says no. The knife guy says none of this makes sense. He should be taking damage. But the big guy says unless it's that weapon, the only weapon in the game that gives 100% damage reduction on blocks, the beginner's dagger. Anyone can buy it from the starter shop. The knife guy says that's cheating, but the big guy says it's not. Nobody uses it because its damage is too low. So the knife guy realizes that Oasis is just extremely good at blocking. The big guy agrees. Either this guy is a PvP king or he's hacking the game. The knife guy says he's never seen a hacker in this game before. But if that's the case, he'll use more power. Hacker or not, the guy won't survive this. He pulls out a crossbow enchanted with electricity and uses the skill Arrow Rain aimed at Oasis. The arrows fly towards him quickly, but as if dancing, Oasis deflects them one by one, blocking and breaking all of them. The two attackers think he must definitely be a hacker. But actually he's not, because as he blocks the arrows, his dagger loses durability and breaks. The system notifies him that his dagger has broken due to low durability. Oasis realizes he's screwed and immediately gets hit by a huge arrow in the face. The system announces that he has died. Meanwhile, the attackers wonder if she's a hacker, because Oasis's character is wearing female clothing. If not a hacker, why would a beginner have such good reflexes? They say they'll report it to an admin. But someone behind them asks, why are they doing a 2v1? It's the protagonist, hungover and exhausted after drinking so much. They ask who he is and if he's a friend of the guy who just died. Oasis is on the ground, crying and calling for his master. The protagonist tells the two attackers that if you kill a player, you should be prepared to be killed as well. They know that very well, don't they? The protagonist draws his sword to challenge them. Of course, they panic, but they don't even have time to react before the protagonist rushes towards them with incredible speed. And he launches an attack. But the knife guy notices that he didn't take any damage at all and says the protagonist is just acting tough because in the end he's just a noob. The protagonist thinks he didn't do damage because of the level difference. Then the other guy asks if he's ready to die right there. But the protagonist quickly dodges the attack and thinks it will be a waste to use this on them. Even so, he uses one of his basilisk poison potions. He says he has no other choice and throws it right into the area where the two guys are. The knife guy wonders if that's poisoned. He can smell something, but before he can finish his thought, he starts running out of the poison cloud. The protagonist throws another poison potion, and they realize they're completely screwed. From the top of a wall, the protagonist says this poison has properties similar to gas, so if fire touches it, well, they already know what will happen, right? The knife guy wants to run for his life, but the big guy has already realized the disaster. A huge explosion follows. Debris flies everywhere. Flames erupt, and the big guy's body is blown away as he screams for his master. When the flames subside a little, we see that the big guy is already drinking a potion to recover his HP. He asks the knife guy why he isn't drinking one too, but the knife guy says he's stunned and thinks if a player loses 70% of their HP at once, they become stunned, and if they're attacked before the stun wears off, it's over. They die instantly. The protagonist approaches through the fire and says they must be pretty high level, judging by the fact that they're still alive. The knife guy desperately shouts that his stun needs to be removed so he can keep fighting, but the big guy says he'll protect his friend. He then uses an ability called guard stance. He enters a state where he can't attack, but his defense and the defense of his party members increases greatly. The protagonist thinks that if that's how they want to play, he'll use abilities too. He activates Dark Aura, and his sword becomes completely engulfed in dark magic. The big guy assumes the attack will be useless, but the protagonist charges forward with an aerial strike and hits the big guy's stomach, causing intense pain. The protagonist says, "It's different now, isn't it?" This is the exclusive skill of the Dark Knight, Dark Aura, which enhances the weapon with black flames, dealing additional damage equal to 100% of the user's attack power. This bonus damage completely ignores defense. The cost of this ability is 1% of the user's current HP per second. The protagonist thinks that using 1% HP per second is risky, but it's the only way to harm this guy. That's why he needs to finish the fight as quickly as possible. He attacks again and again and again. The knife guy tells the big guy to drop his defensive stance and attack him. The big guy agrees and prepares to strike the protagonist, gathering strength for a massive punch that could crush him. He uses the skill Metallic Smash, launching the protagonist far away. The big guy thinks he crushed the protagonist's skull, but the protagonist blocked the attack completely because he also had a beginner's dagger. The knife guy says the protagonist switched weapons, but the big guy insists that switching weapons in combat is impossible. The knife guy replies that theoretically it is impossible, and this is the first time he's seen someone actually do it. If you mess up even a little during the switch, your weapon could fall to the ground, leaving you completely defenseless, but the protagonist executed the technique effortlessly. The knife guy tells the big guy they need to run, they need to get out of there immediately. This guy isn't a noob, he's a veteran. The protagonist says he's not just a veteran, he's practically a living fossil in this game. Both of them are shocked, and the protagonist charges at them again at high speed. The big guy receives a glancing blow, but realizes the protagonist wasn't aiming at him, he was heading toward the knife guy. The knife guy, thinking his stun is about to wear off, tells him not to worry, but it's too late. He is cut clean in half, his upper body flying one way and his legs the other. He thinks he might need to log out for a while. Meanwhile, the big guy runs for his life. He wonders what kind of technique that was, and decides to log out for now, but the system says it takes 5 seconds to exit the game. He counts 5, 4, 3, and the protagonist finishes for him 2 and 1. The big guy is also cut in half. Meanwhile, back on that deck in the middle of the water, Asus wonders if his master forgot about him, but shortly after, the protagonist uses another resurrection stone on Asus. Asus thinks that this job is insane. He has no idea how long he can endure this. But then the protagonist places his hand on Asus's head, apologizes, and says that this time he truly feels sorry because he arrived too late. Asus is shocked at how gentle the protagonist is with him. The protagonist starts melting the ice that was covering Asus's body, but Asus says he's fine. It's not the first time he's been killed and resurrected. Meanwhile, the system notifies the protagonist that his notoriety is at 4,380, and he realizes that the guys he just killed didn't give him any points. They were almost worthless. Asus is confused because they seemed pretty strong, but the protagonist explains that when notorious players participate in PvP, the winning side receives half of the opponent's notoriety. However, the protagonist says his notoriety only increased by 2,000, meaning he got just 1,000 from each of them. But at least his demon evolved to level 2. Now it gives him 4 additional attack power and 44 additional HP. The protagonist also warns Asus that he was kind of accused of hacking because he was moving too fast, so he tells him to slow down a little during combat. Asus asks, "Huh? On purpose?" And the protagonist says yes, it's better if he shows a bit of humanity, you know? Asus is confused. Humanity? He stands there thinking, and the protagonist calls him. "Hey, are you just going to stand there?" Asus gives a small smile, and the protagonist says they're going to get him a new job. Asus gets excited, but they head straight to a temple, and Asus asks, "Wait, isn't this a temple?" The protagonist places his hands on Asus's shoulders and explains that the Dark Knight skill consumes HP as a cost, so he always needs healing, and drinking potions alone isn't enough. He begs Asus to become a priest so he can heal him during battle. Asus complains that in the end, he's going to be treated like an ambulance, but the protagonist panics, picks him up, and insists on changing his job right now. Asus starts crying, saying he wanted a hidden class, and he was promised a special job. A little later, Asus approaches wearing a new outfit and says it's done, now he's a priest. Asus is now a level 12 priest with item level 30, 5 strength, 5 agility, 15 intelligence, 5 stamina, and 20 magic power. The protagonist says the outfit looks great on him. He really does look like a priest, but he doesn't understand why he's unhappy. Being a priest is so noble. Asus just says, "Okay, for the love of God, that's enough, all right?" The protagonist says, "Now that we've changed classes, we can move to our next goal." Asus asks, he's not going to kill more NPCs, right? The protagonist says no, their goal is now to reach level 90, the maximum level, but they must do it in just 1 month. Asus is obviously shocked. He thinks that normally it takes 6 months to reach level 90, but in 1 month a major update will happen. The continent will expand, new equipment will be released, and the level cap will increase from 90 to 100. The protagonist says that by reaching the max level before the update, they'll be able to dominate all the iron mines in the new continent. Later, on the Serpent Gizero Hill, a normal difficulty dungeon with 5 quests and a recommended level of 50, Asus asks why they're in a level 50 dungeon. The protagonist tells him not to worry because he has a plan. Suddenly, a huge snake appears before them. Asus barely reacts, so the protagonist pushes him out of the way to dodge the strike. The impact shakes the ground hard. Asus falls, trying to recover, and sees the protagonist facing the snake without an ounce of fear. The protagonist complains that the snake scared him for a second, then uses dark aura on his sword, calls for Asus's support, and charges at the serpent. Asus prepares his healing magic, determined to protect his master. Meanwhile, Mincheol is already slashing the snake, but it becomes enraged and counterattacks with its tail, throwing the protagonist far away and slamming him into a stone pillar in the cave. Asus panics, but uses Healing Touch, fully restoring the protagonist's HP. The protagonist praises him, saying he did a great job, and that he was right to trust him with healing. He charges again with his dark aura, and Asus follows, saying he can count on him. He keeps healing and healing and healing, while the protagonist continues cutting, losing HP to deal damage. But Asus keeps spamming heal spells non-stop. The protagonist asks him if he's stupid. His HP is already full, so there's no reason to waste heals. He warns that at this rate, the monster will target Asus instead. But by the time he says it, it's already too late. The snake completely ignores the protagonist and heads straight for Asus. As Asus continues healing, unaware, the serpent prepares to strike. With no chance to react, Asus is simply devoured, swallowed whole. The protagonist realizes things have gone terribly wrong. It's explained again that Dark Aura costs 1% of the user's HP per second. Without healing, he won't last even a minute. He also thinks that if he dies here, both of them will suffer an experience penalty. He charges forward, thinking that this cannot happen, but the snake counterattacks immediately. It doesn't hit him directly, just a graze, but it's enough to break his momentum. Still, the protagonist already figured out the snake's attack pattern. He knows the tail strike is coming next, so he dodges by jumping, climbs onto the snake's body, and waits for the next move. He also knows the snake will try to coil around him, and he dodges that too by leaping away. The final move in the pattern is the poisonous bite. When the snake lunges, he easily avoids it as well. He thinks, I have only one chance. It has to be now. He prepares himself and drives his sword straight into the snake's head. He pushes all his strength into it. The blade pierces the snake's skull, but it doesn't die. The protagonist realizes he still isn't dealing enough damage. The snake throws him off and he falls, thinking hopelessly that he just needed one more attack. As he plummets, believing everything is over, a healing spell suddenly reaches him, fully restoring his strength. He wonders if Oasis did that, but how? Then he notices a glow inside the snake's body. Oasis is inside, still alive. The protagonist runs toward the snake and tells Oasis to hold on because he's coming to save him. As promised, with one final strike, he slices the snake completely in half. After some time clawing through the carcass, he finally manages to pull Oasis out, who was nearly being digested. He yells, asking if Oasis is okay, and apparently he is. He's alive. Oasis says he told him he could be trusted. A bit later, Oasis is shocked that he leveled up 5 times just from killing one of those snakes. The protagonist explains it happened because the level difference between him and the snake was massive, but he thinks it could have been better. He came here for the experience, not the items. If the snake's loot had dropped, that would have been nice, but he plans to enter another dungeon later with better drops anyway. Suddenly, the protagonist walks up to a wall and starts feeling around for something. Oasis asks what he's doing. The protagonist explains that this dungeon was originally supposed to be a lizard man dungeon, but because this is a virtual reality game, players felt uncomfortable having to kill monsters that looked too human. So the game's design philosophy became monsters should look like monsters, humans should look like humans, with clear visual distinctions. He also explains that lizard men are very intelligent and use many traps, so there might still be remnants of the original dungeon design hidden here. Eventually, he grabs a stone that looks different from the others, and suddenly a large pit full of spikes opens up, clearly a lethal trap. Oasis is shocked, thinking anyone would die if they fell in there. The protagonist says the trap isn't even necessary because any monster in this dungeon could kill them in seconds. So they begin their new plan. Oasis asks what they're going to do, and the protagonist tells him he'll have to act as bait. Oasis questions why it has to be him. The protagonist says they'll do better next time, but since it's his first time, he only needs to bring 10 monsters. That should be enough. So Oasis goes out alone to lure the monsters. The first one appears, and he immediately panics, calling for his master. But the protagonist raises his hands, signaling that he won't help until there are 10. Oasis keeps running, and more snakes start following him. The protagonist watches Oasis disappear into the distance, then come running back, even more desperate and crying, begging his master to save him. The protagonist says it's just a little more, but Oasis insists he's exhausted and sprints toward the protagonist with all the snakes behind him. When he reaches the spot, the protagonist says, "Now," and turns the stone again. The trapdoor opens, but Oasis falls in along with all the snakes. The snakes die instantly, and naturally, Oasis begs for help. The protagonist reaches out his hand, but their hands slip apart. Oasis is horrified, but then accepts his fate and says, not again, before falling and dying on the spikes. Hours later, Oasis is luring more snakes. He runs back and tells his master that these are the last 8 snakes in the dungeon. The protagonist understands and turns the stone again. The trap opens and all the snakes fall and die, but this time Oasis manages to jump to safety. He says after dying 3 times, he had to learn eventually. He happily tells the protagonist that he's already level 30. The protagonist says that's great, and that soon they'll change classes again. But before that, he wants to kill the dungeon boss. Standing in front of the boss room doors, Oasis reminds him that this is still a level 50 dungeon. It might be too dangerous. but the protagonist says they'll be using traps again.